Like the Feature Fairy 13.
with Sidney Poitier. They called me Mr. Tibbs. Was a demand for respect, not just for a fictional character, but for Black Americans as well. Sidney Poitier said, I was the only Black person on the set. It was unusual for me to be in a circumstance in which every move I made would tantamount to representation of 18 million people. Sidney Poitier is recognized as one of the most groundbreaking Hollywood actors the industry had ever seen. During his impressive career, Sidney became the first Black actor rewarded with the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Lady of the Fields in 1964. Sidney Poitier is quoted as saying, living constantly involved being genuine, involved listening and responding to others honestly and openly. It involves being in the moment. Sidney Poitier.
Author Alex Haley, 1921 to 1992, was best known for works depicting the struggles of African Americans. Raised in Hennon, Tennessee, he began writing to help pass the time during his 2 decades with the U.S. Coast Guard. After conducting interviews with the Malcolm X for Playboy magazine, he turned the material into his first book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, 1965. Haley's subsequent novel, Roots, 1976, was a fictionalized account of his own family history traced through 7 generations. It was adapted into a 1977 miniseries that became the most watched broadcast in TV history, a record it would hold for years. Haley's works inspired a nationwide interest in genealogy and contributed to the easing of racial tensions in America. Time magazine called the autobiography of Malcolm X one of the 10 most important nonfiction books of the 20th century. Haley always maintained that the goal of his writing and his life was simply to advance the cause of Black people. He once said, "The money I have made and will be making means nothing to me compared to the fact that about half of the Black people I meet, ranging from the most sophisticated to the least sophisticated, say to me, 'I'm proud of you.' I feel strongly about always earning that and never letting Black people down."
Texas Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, 1936 to 1996, rose to the national stage from Houston, largely African-American Fifth Ward, becoming a public defender of the U.S. Constitution and a leading presence in Democratic Party politics for 2 decades. She was the first Black woman elected to Texas State Senate and the first Black Texan in Congress. Jordan volunteered for John F. Kennedy 1960 presidential campaign, heading Harris County voters drive that yielded 80% turnout. She twice ran unsuccessfully for the Texas House before winning the 1966 contest for the newly created Texas State District. Jordan ran for Congress as a Democratic nominee for Houston's 18th district. She won, becoming the first African-American woman from a southern state to serve the U.S. House of Representatives. With support from her close advisor, Lyndon B. Johnson, Jordan was appointed to key posts, including the House Judiciary Committee.
W.E.B. Du Bois, or William Edward Bernhardt Du Bois, was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University. He was an African American writer, teacher, sociologist, and activist whose work transformed the way the lives of Black citizens were seen in American society. His son, Bernhardt, who died in 1899, contracted diphtheria and died after Du Bois spent nights long looking for one of the three Black doctors in Atlanta, since no white doctor would treat the child. This resulted in him writing the essay, The Passing of the Firstborn. He wrote a book entitled The Souls of the Black Folk. In 1909, Du Bois co-founded the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. In its charter, the NAACP promised to champion equal rights and eliminate racial prejudice and to advance the interests of colored citizens in regard to voting rights, legal justice, educational and employment opportunity. On the day after Du Bois' death, as the March of Washington began, Martin Luther King Jr. utilized him as a pioneer for civil rights. Du Bois left a political and social legacy that continues today, and his works are a vital part of American studies. The children shall lead, and nothing so true in what W. Du Bois said. Children learn more from what you are than what you teach. W. Du Bois. Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery to become a leading abolitionist. She led hundreds of enslaved people to freedom along the route of the Underground Railroad. Born into slavery in Maryland, Harriet Tubman escaped to freedom in the North in 1849. She was also a nurse, a Union spy, and a woman suffrage supporter. Tubman is one of the most recognized icons in American history, and her legacy was to inspire countless people from every race and background. Tubman's code name was Moses, and she was illiterate her entire life. Other Underground Railroad code names included Canaan for Canada and Spiritual Song for directions along the railroad. Since few slaves were literate, the route of the Underground Railroad had to be accessible to everyone. Tubman used the stars and the mosses in the woods to guide her in aiding escapees. She suffered from narcolepsy as a result of a head injury caused by her overseer. She would often go into sleeping spells and was difficult to wake. She considered the dreams she had during these spells to be religious visions, and her religiosity was a guiding reason for helping her slave escape. Her work in Moses was a serious business. She avoided cops, dogs, mobs, bounty hunters, and slave catchers. She and her escapees slept in swamps and moved only at night. Once with her own railroad, she threatened to kill anyone who lost their nerve to escape. She never lost a slave. She recommended slaves escape on Saturdays, as owners used Sunday as a day of rest, and would not notice slave missing until Monday, giving the slave a 2 days head start. She also preferred to move during the winter when the days are shorter. Estimates of slaves she helped ranged as high as 3,000. Tubman was a Union scout during the Civil War. She also served as a nurse, cook, and spy to federal troops. From 1862 to 1865, she received $200 for 3 years of combat service. When she applied for veteran compensation, it took her 34 years to get it. Only after the intervention of President Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward, she was 78 years old. While under the command of Colonel James Montgomery, Harriet Tubman led 150 Black Union troops across Combahee River in South Carolina. In June 1863, using information from an escaped slave and led Union riverboats through the Confederate torpedo traps, freeing 750 slaves and dropping off Union troops. The troops burned the states of influential Southern secessionists who supplied Confederate forces. She did not lose a single troop. Harriet Tubman is quoted as saying, "I had reasoned this out in my mind. There was only one or two things I had right to: liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other." Harriet Tubman.
Colorado Health Agency celebrating Black History Month.
Why we celebrate Black history? Enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Thurgood Marshall. Everybody remember Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. Did you know that Thurgood Marshall argued 32 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, more than anyone else in history? Thurgood Marshall, perhaps best known as the first African-American Supreme Court justice, played an instrumental role in promoting racial equality during the Civil Rights Movement. As a practicing attorney throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Marshall was recognized as one of the top attorneys in the United States. Shortly after this legal success, Marshall became a staff lawyer for the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, and eventually was named the chief of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy appointed Marshall to the U.S. Court of Appeals, and in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson made him the first Black Solicitor General. It was clear the successful attorney was well on his way making a case for a Supreme Court nomination. In 1967, following retirement of Justice Thomas C. Clark, President Johnson appointed Marshall the first Black justice to the Supreme Court, proclaiming it was the right thing to do, the right time to do it, and the right man in the right place. Marshall, a Howard Law School graduate, ranked first in his class. During his 24-year term as Supreme Court Justice, Marshall's passionate support for individual and civil rights guided his policy decisions. Most historians regard him as the influential figure in shaping social policies and upholding laws to protect minorities. Racism separates, but it never liberates. Hatred generates fear, and fear, once given a foothold, binds, consumes, imprisons. Nothing is gained from prejudice. No one benefits from racism. Thurgood Marshall.
Colorado Health Agency
Celebrating Black History Month. Why we celebrate Black history? Enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Colorado Health Agency is proud to be featuring Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and Katherine Johnson, a remarkable group of African American women working as human-computer at what would become NASA Langley Research Center in Virginia, but breaking down their own gender and racial barriers. Dorothy Johnson Vaughan was an African-American mathematics teacher who became one of the leading mathematical engineers in the early days of the aerospace industry. After U.S. defense industry desegregated, Vaughan worked with the leading computer operators and engineers, becoming an expert in the Fortran programming coding language at NASA. Laws required for mathematicians to work separately from their white female counterpart. Vaughan was assigned to the segregated West Area Computing Unit, where she was required to use separate dining and restroom facilities. At the NACA, she was responsible for calculating mathematical computations for engineers, conducting aeronautical experiments in wind tunnels on the variables affecting drag and lift of aircraft. In 1949, Vaughan became the first Black supervisor at the NACA when she was promoted to the manager of the West Area Computers. This work group was composed entirely of African-American female mathematicians. The title gave her rare visibility, and she collaborated with other well-known computer operators on various projects. She also became a dedicated advocate for female employees who deserved it, promotion or raises, often supporting white women as well. Despite all of Vaughn's contribution and effort, she sought but never received another management position at NASA. She retired in 1971. Mathematician Mary Winston Jackson excelled academically in a time of racial segregation. Her math and science skills earned her a position as a human computer for the NACA, and she later became NASA's first black female engineer. Along with serving a vital role in the development of the space program, she helped other women and minorities advance their careers. Jackson died in February 2005 at the age of 83. After several months of separate and unequal accommodation, Jackson had enough. She considered resigning, but a chance encounter with a supervisor changed her mind. After hearing her complaint, he invited her to work for him, and she accepted it. He quickly saw her potential, encouraged her to take engineering classes. In a time, she was promoted to aeronautic engineer, making her NASA's first black female engineer, and developed expertise working with the tunnel, analyzing data on aircraft flight experiments. By 1978, Jackson changed positions to be a human resource administrator. She served as both the Federal Women's Program Manager in the Office of Equal Opportunity Program and the Affirmative Action Program Manager. From then until her retirement in 1985, she helped other women and minorities advance their careers, advising them to study and take extra courses to increase their chances for promotion. Katherine Johnson made the most of limited education opportunities for African Americans. Graduating from college at the age of 18, she began working in aeronautics as a computer in 1952, and after the formation of NASA, she performed the calculations that sent astronauts into orbit in the early 1960s and to the moon in 1969. Johnson was honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015 and saw her story brought to light through a book and a feature film the following year. She passed away on February 24, 2020 at the age of 101. The next challenge was to send a man in orbit around the Earth. This involved far more difficult calculation to account for the gravitational pulls of celestial bodies, and by then NASA had begun using electronic computers. Yet, the job wasn't considered complete until Johnson was summoned to check the work of the machines, providing the go-ahead to propel John Glenn into a successful orbit in 1962. While the work of electronic computers took on an increased importance at NASA, Johnson remained highly valuable for her unwavering accuracy. She performed calculations for the historic 1969 Apollo 11 trip to the moon, and the following year when Apollo 13 experienced a malfunction in space, her contribution to contingency procedures helped ensure its safe return. Currently, Health Agency
celebrating Black History Month. Why we celebrate Black History? It enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Asa Philip Randolph was born on April 15, 1889 in Crescent City, Florida. A. Philip Randolph was a labor leader, a civil rights activist who founded the nation's first major black labor union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, in 1925. In the 1930s, his organization effort helped end both racial discrimination in the defense industry and segregation in the U.S. Armed Forces. Randolph was also a principal organizer of the March on Washington in 1963, which paved the way for the passage of the Civil Rights Act following year. In the summer of 1925, Randolph received an invitation to speak to a group of reporters from the Pullman Palace Car Company, a Chicago-based company that hired mainly African American to serve white passengers aboard its luxury railroad sleeping cars. Under Randolph's leadership, the BSCP became the first black union to be granted a charter by the American Federation of Labor, AFL. In 1934, Congress amended the earlier Railway Labor Act to specifically cover workers in sleeping cars, making it legal for Pullman to fire members of the BSCP. After AFL merged with the Congress Industrial Organization in 1955 to form the AFL-CIO, Randolph joined the organization's executive council. He became one of its first two black vice presidents in 1957. Negroes must be free in order to be equal, and they must be equal in order to be free. Men cannot win freedom unless they are winning equality. They cannot win equality unless they win freedom. A. Philip Randolph. Carnegie Health Agency.
The Celebrating Black History Month enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Following U.S. Civil War, regiments of African American men known as the Buffalo Soldiers served on the western frontier, battling the Native Americans and protecting settlers. The Buffalo Soldiers included two regiments of all-black cavalry, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, formed after Congress passed legislation in 1866 that allowed the African Americans to enlist in the country's regular peacetime military. The legislation also brought about the creation of 4 black infantry regiments, eventually consolidated to the 24th and 25th Infantry, which often fought alongside the 9th and 10th Cavalry. Many of the men in the regiment, commanded primarily by white officers, were among approximately 180,000 African Americans who served in the Union Army during the Civil War. For more than 2 decades in the late 19th century, the 9th and 10th Cavalry engaged in military campaigns against the hostile Native Americans on the plains across the Southwest. These Buffalo Soldiers also captured horse and cattle thieves, built roads, and protected the U.S. mail, stagecoaches, and wagon trains, all while contending with challenging terrain, inadequate supplies, and discrimination. It's unclear exactly how the Buffalo Soldiers got their nickname. Other sources theorize the name originated with the belief of some Native Americans that the soldiers' dark, curly, black hair resembled that of a buffalo. Whatever the case, the soldier viewed the nickname as one of respect, and the 10th Cavalry even used a figure of a buffalo in its coat of arms. Benji, why don't you go to bed when you're supposed to, like Barney? Okay, I'll read you a bedtime story. Since it's Black History Month, I'll read you a story about Benjamin Banneker. Carnegie Health Agency.
Celebrating the Black scientists and innovators is a lightning commentary on the ingenuity of some of the extraordinary innovators whose genius shone through the rows of blocks of diversity and racial barriers to provide mankind something called it convenience, the quality of life, luxury, and even order. They industrialized the burden of labor and created new ways to ease the plight, servitude, and affliction. The modernization of machinery that was casually accepted as given was once a non-existent commodity, where
it not for the contribution of these gifted men. Benjamin Banneker was a self-taught mathematician, outstanding astronomer, author of Almanac, surveyor, humanitarian, and inventor. He was born near Baltimore, Maryland in 1731. He was the only child of a free mulatto mother and African father who purchased his own freedom from slavery.
Benjamin Banneker has so many accomplishments. Here are a list of a few. Joseph Levi, a traveling salesman, showed Banneker a pocket watch, something he had never seen before. He became so fascinated over the watch that Levi gave it to him. He took the watch home and spent days taking it apart, putting it back together. In 1753, using the watch as a model, Banneker produced the first wooden clock ever built in the U.S., made of wood and by hand, including the gears. It kept perfect time for more than 40 years. Also, the same thing happened when George Elliott, a neighbor, introduced Banneker to the science of astronomy, which he rapidly mastered because his aptitude in math and astrology enabled him. He also predicted the solar eclipse that took place in April 14, 1789. In 1792, Banneker began publishing Almanac, was the first scientific book written by a Black American, and it was published annually for more than a decade. Banneker's major reputation stemmed from his service as a surveyor on a six-man team, which helped design the blueprints for Washington, D.C. President Washington had appointed Banneker, making him the first Black presidential appointee in the United States. Banneker helped in selecting the sites for the U.S. Capitol building, the U.S. Treasury building, the White House, and other federal buildings. When the chairman of the civil engineering team abruptly resigned and returned to France with the plans, Banneker, who had a photographic memory, reproduced them in their entirety. Washington, D.C., with its grand avenues and buildings, was completed and stands today as a monument to Banneker's genius. Banneker's preoccupation with scientific matters in no way diminished his concern for the plight of blacks. In a 12-page letter to Thomas and Jefferson, he refuted the statement that blacks was inferior to whites. Jefferson changed his position as a testimonial, sent a copy of Banneker's Almanac to the French Academy of Science in Paris. Another was used in the British House of Commons to support an argument for the education of blacks. Banneker was a living proof that the strength of the mind is no way connected with the color of the skin.
Benji, why you not asleep?
Carmody Health Agency celebrating Black History Month.
Why we celebrate Black history? It enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Carmody Health Agency featuring Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks used to say that he used the camera as a weapon, shining a light on what would otherwise go unnoticed. One of the most famous photographs shows a family gathered around a segregated water fountain in Mobile, Alabama in 1956. Parks' pictures show the struggle of Black Americans to gain equal rights during the Civil Rights Movement, as well as depiction of poverty and racism across the country. Gordon Parks is one of the most groundbreaking figures in the 20th century photography. His photojournalism during the 1940s to the 1970s revealed an important aspect of American culture and became known for focusing on issues of civil rights, poverty, race relations, and urban life. The youngest of 15 children, Parks born into poverty and segregation in 1912 in Kansas, and throughout his early life was subjected to abject discrimination. It wasn't until he was 25 he first picked up the camera. In 1930, shortly after arriving in Minnesota as a teenager, Parks worked at the St. Paul Hotel as a waiter. He worked as a staff photographer at the St. Paul Recorder and Minneapolis Spoken, a local Black-owned newspaper. He shot the latest fashion of Frank Murphy's department store in downtown St. Paul, and he had his first solo exhibition at the Holly Q. Brown Community Center. He went on to co-found and serve as artistic director for Essence magazine. One of Gordon Parks' series called A Harlem Family which Park worked on for life and focused on the life of the Fontanelli family. Parks was asked by his editors to explain why the nation's inner cities were falling apart, and the photographer felt it was down to two things: racism and poverty. To bring these issues to life, Park once again focused on the daily life of an impoverished black family. This image is inspired by Ralph Ellison's book, The Invisible Man, which came out the same year Ellison novels about African-American man whose color rendered him invisible. It addresses many of the social and intellectual issues facing African-Americans in the 20th century. Park's image of a figure emerging from a manhole was created in collaboration with Ellison and evokes the sense of emotional isolation. The image appeared in Life magazine alongside three other images of Parks, which acted as a visual interpretation of Ellison's novel. Gordon Park's choices of subject matter set his series of photographs of a family living under segregation in 1956 Alabama apart from others of the period. Rather than focusing on the demonstrations, boycotts, and brutality that characterized the battle for racial justice, Park emphasized the ordinary details of one family life. His ability to elicit empathy through an emphasis on intimacy and shared human experience made them especially moving. I have been born again and again, always finding something or someone to love, to win or to lose, to mourn or celebrate. Now with life quieting down around me, I look back through an autumn mind, searching the clear air, the roots of things. I watched it, the growing or the expiring along the way. Wherever my feet have taken me, I have found both goodness and pain, and that's all I have to give. I could depart with washed hand, keeping the silence and telling nothing, but I have no secret doors to hide the memories. Gordon Parks marched to a different beat. Camaraderie Health Agency invites you to continue to help us celebrate those who gave their life for racial equality and justice. Camaraderie Health Agency.
Celebrating Black History Month enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
If you see a good fight, get in it. Vernon John. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. succeeded Vernon John as minister of Texas Avenue Baptist Church. Reverend John had a lasting effect on King both personally and professionally. In Stride Towards Freedom, his memoirs of the Montgomery Boys boycott, King described John as a brilliant preacher with a creative mind and a fearless man who never allowed an injustice to come to his attention without speaking out against it. King found an example in John, a preacher who was able to use a religious position in the community to challenge his congregation to be less providential. Race was not a popular topic in the press in the late 1940s. It was assumed that black people would accept their position unquestionably. But John started to make waves. He persuaded black women to bring charges in court against white rapists, and he helped the women with their cases. No one was convicted, but just getting the white men into court was an achievement. Several years before 1955, when Rosa Parks made history by refusing to move to the back of the bus, John tried to sit in the white section. When the bus driver refused to let him, John demanded to have his fare back and got it. John was even bold enough to order food in an all-white restaurant. He was a man ahead of his time in the civil rights movement, believing that all of it took for evil to flourish was for good people to do nothing. He did something. He was well known for his controversial sermons, topics such as "It's safe to kill Negroes" in Montgomery. He also shocked his middle-class congregation by selling farm produce outside the church. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote this of Johns. A fearless man, he often chided the congregation for sitting up so proudly with their many academic degrees and yet lacking the very thing degrees should confer. That is self-respect. One of the basic theses was that any individual who submitted willingly to injustice did not really deserve more justice. Although February 28 marked the end of Black History Month, Carnegie Health Agency will continue all year long to celebrate those who made the sacrifice for racial equality and social justice. Benji, where you going? Slow down. Benji, I know you're excited about riding the train, but you gotta slow it down. Hey, when we get on the train, I'm gonna read you a story about Andrew Jackson Beard and his contribution to the railway. Carnegie Health Agency.
Celebrating the Black scientists and innovators is a lightning commentary on the ingenuity of some of the extraordinary innovators whose genius shone through the rows of blocks of diversity and racial barriers to provide mankind something called it convenience, quality of life, luxury, and even order. They industrialized the burden of labor and created new ways to ease the plight, servitude, and affliction. The modernization of machinery that was casually accepted as given was once a non-existent commodity were it not for the contribution of these gifted men.
Andrew Beard was born enslaved on a plantation in Woodland, Alabama in 1849. Shortly before his slavery ended, he received emancipation at age 15 and he married at age 16. Andrew Beard was a farmer, a carpenter, a blacksmith, a railroad worker, a businessman, and finally an inventor. Andrew Jackson Beard lived an extraordinary life for a Black American inventor. In 1887, Andrew Beard patented a second plow and sold it for $5,200. This patent was for a design that allowed the pitch of the blades of the plow or the cultivators to be adjusted. His invention of the Jenny automatic car coupler revolutionized railroad safety. Unlike the vast majority of inventors who never profited from their patent, he profited from his inventions. In 1889, Beard invented a rotary engine. Patented on July 5, 1892. He claimed that this steam engine was cheaper to build and operate than other and would not explode. The coupler design was sold for $50,000 in 1897, equivalent to $1,509,200 in 2018 currency. He was inducted in the National Inventors Hall of Fame in Akron, Ohio in 2006 for this achievement. Camaraderie Agency celebrating Black History Month. Why we celebrate Black history? It enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Barack Obama, who served as the 45th President of the United States. Obama was the first African-American president of the United States, a member of the Democratic Party. He previously served as a U.S. Senator from Illinois from 2005 to 2008, and as an Illinois State Senator from 1997 to 2004. After graduating from Columbia University in 1983, he worked as a community organizer in Chicago. In 1988, he enrolled in Harvard Law School, where he was the first Black president of Harvard Law Review. After graduating, he became a civil rights attorney and academic teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago Law School. Barack Obama, in his last year of the second term, Obama spoke at two events that clearly moved him: the 50th anniversary of Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, and the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Our union is not yet perfect, but we are getting closer, he said in Selma, and that's why we celebrate. He told those attending to the museum opening in Washington, mindful that our work is not yet done. We are reminded that in the fleeting time we have on this earth, what matters not wealth or status or power or fame, but rather how well we have loved it and what small part we have played in making the lives of other people better. Barack Obama.
Let us go to Conrad Health Agency Theater. Conrad Health Agency.
Celebrating Black History Month. Why we celebrate Black history? Enables adults and children to gain a broader understanding of Black history, going beyond racism and slavery to also spotlight Black achievement. Black history is an integral part of this country.
Whitney Moore Young Jr., born July 31st, 1921 in Lincoln Ridge, Kentucky, an articulate U.S. civil rights leader who spearheaded the drive for equal opportunity for blacks in U.S. industry and government service during his 10 years as head of the National Urban League from 1961 to 71, the world's largest social civil rights organization. After the Army service in World War II, Young switched his career interest from medicine to social work, in which he took his MA from the University of Minnesota in 1947 and starting as a director of industrial relationship for Urban League at St. Paul, Minnesota. Appointed executive director of National Urban League in 1961, Young won an impressive reputation as a national black activist who helped bridge the gap between white political and business leaders and poor blacks and militants. He was particularly credited with almost single-handedly persuading corporate America and major foundations to aid the civil rights movement through financial contribution. Young, who been a consultant on racial matters to both President John F. Kennedy and President Lyndon B. Johnson.